I want to start off by normalizing again that being nervous or uncomfortable on video is completely natural, especially in our virtual setup with all of these additional factors that we have to deal with. I mentioned that I've done quite a few video interviews before. I still get nervous on camera. At Prezi, I work with a lot of keynote speakers and they get nervous sometimes too. And for many of them, this is their full-time job, if not a big part of their job. So totally natural. And today we'll be talking about techniques to quiet those nerves, as well as ways to boost your confidence so that instead of feeling like this here, you feel more like this. Ready and excited to create amazing virtual presentations and videos that will have you feeling really proud of yourself and really energized after seeing your team members and customer reactions. But first, before we can learn how to stand out on video, we need to acknowledge the reality of our day-to-day. We have all of these competing priorities and distractions that are making it even harder to grab and keep people's attention. This isn't much of a surprise when we see things like this on a daily basis, aka the before. Your audience's world is noisy. They are getting constantly bombarded with messages and content, and screen sharing is just not cutting it anymore as a way to be remembered or to stand out. And we can't really blame video fatigue because there are so many videos and other types of video content holding our attention. If you take a moment to reflect on how much video content you're watching on a daily basis, I know my number is embarrassingly high up there, you will realize that video fatigue isn't actually the issue. We are just bored with the screen shares and bulleted slides and tired of seeing the same types of presentations over and over and over again. We can't settle for the status quo anymore. The future of video and video meetings is really now about creating experiences where everyone is a participant and everyone can contribute in creative ways beyond the screen share, the hand raise, and the chat box. So how do we move away from the status quo? This leads us into the first section of my presentation, where I'll talk about 3 ways to boost your confidence and appear more competent on video, and then 3 ways to keep your audience engaged. One of the best ways to grow your confidence is to know that you're making a good impression on camera. There are, of course, the typical suggestions for growing your confidence, like practice a lot, and maybe you need to write out a script and dress to impress, which are all very legitimate pieces of advice. But I want to talk about the less obvious ways to gain confidence that will be particularly helpful based on our virtual setups. So I'll share my favorite 3 tips first, and then keep in mind that many of the other tips that I'm sharing throughout this presentation will also apply to this. So the first way to increase your confidence, believe it or not, is through great lighting. So lighting is very, very easy to fix, but for whatever reason, it's an afterthought for a lot of people. So it may not seem obvious at first, I know it wasn't for me, but lighting does have a psychological effect on you. I think I can safely say that most of us want to look good and professional on camera, at least with the upper half of our bodies, right? But when we look like this, it's distracting, it's unclear, and it doesn't really leave the other side with the best impression. And of course, you as a presenter probably don't feel great about how you're coming across either. So this is how we fix that. You'll want to make sure that you have a light source in front of you facing your face. Make sure that it's never facing your back, coming from behind, or else that's going to cause you to be backlit and look like you're in a true crime documentary. I'm sure some of us, or many of us, have experienced that on calls already. And really the ideal situation is you actually have a window in front of you so that you're getting natural light, again, coming in from the front, facing your face. If you still need an extra boost, I would recommend purchasing a ring light or 2. I actually have 2 on both sides of my desk right now, as well as a soft box in front of me. Once you have your lighting ready to go, the next thing that you'll want to focus on is your visuals. So many of us have probably heard various stats talking about how impactful visuals are. For example, 90% of the information processed by the brain is visual, or 80% of people remember what they see versus what they hear and read, and 65% of people identify as visual learners. Now, if you've ever told a story where everyone was attentive and really excited about what you had to say next, you'll know what sort of confidence boost that gives you. The same goes with your presentation. If you're using visuals well, your viewers are going to be more tuned in and actually retain what you're telling them, which is going to make you feel more confident about what you're sharing. Visuals can also be helpful in other ways when it comes to confidence building. So I don't know about all of you, but for me, one of the scariest things about presenting is feeling like everyone is staring at me, judging my every word. But I have found that adding visuals helps me relax more as a presenter because they help balance out the audience's attention between me and my content. Now, the last way that visuals give me confidence is through what I like to call the teacher effect. When you can use visuals creatively and walk through content similar to how a teacher might at the front of the classroom, there's an added level of authority that leads to confidence. Oops. The next tip I have for you is to curate your environment. Having a well thought out, curated environment is going to give a more professional look and feel to your presentation. And similar to lighting, if you look more professional, you're just going to feel better about how you're coming off. Now, before I moved into this apartment here, I was in a studio apartment. My bed was literally right behind my desk, pushed up against it. I always felt very self-conscious about it, wondering on calls, were people paying attention to me? Were they getting distracted by my background? Now, spacing issues like these, they can't always be fixed, but there are hacks that you can use to try to make your background look more professional. So you can use a room divider, for example. I think I saw someone on the call have one, which is great. I had a coworker who hung up a curtain behind him, which I thought was very creative. So there are ways that you can at least create a professional background, even if you're hacking some things a little bit. Now, when you're starting off, a clean background like Jessica is using here usually works best so that you and your content don't get lost. And again, so people don't get distracted by what's going on behind you. But once you get more comfortable with your background, you can start getting really creative with it. So if there are any NPR fans in the audience, you might recognize Guy Raz here. You can see that he chose an outdoor setting for his background. It looks really cool, and he's also getting the natural light that I mentioned earlier. Or I love this example by Ted. She only had 2 plants behind her, but she had all of this natural light and the colors of the plants really popped against the white. So I thought it was such a beautiful setup and she looked so professional, but also really approachable. So this is actually one of my favorite setups that I've seen so far. Now, in my past presentations, I actually called this section curating your background. But I think with all the advances that we're seeing in tech and how people are up-leveling their video calls, creating your environment is a more accurate description of what someone needs to do to really stand out and impress. And you're actually the first audience seeing this new tip. So at Prezi, we're seeing a lot of companies and customers creating a true virtual experience on their video that contributes to their overall presence and professionalism. So here's an example showing how you can have both a great background and your video becomes even more impressive once you add a simple name tag and visual elements to the foreground of the screen. And the visuals here ties into what I mentioned before about the impact of visuals, but you can see it's really not just about the background, it's now the background and the foreground and the entire experience and environment you're creating in your virtual world.